Hey, what's up, guys? So with season 1 officially starting, I've been trying to gather as much info as I can for Mythic Plus to make this my Affliction War Within season 1 Mythic Plus guide. I'm going to try and cover as much as I can for both Soul Harvester and Hellcaller. However, this is all my opinion and things will probably change, especially as I continue to push keys higher this season. So if you want to stay up to date on everything Affliction Mythic Plus, be sure to come by the stream and join the Discord. Either way, let's jump right into it. In this guide, I'm going to cover stats, gear, racial abilities, Soul Harvester overview, build, single target, and then AoE rotation, Hellcaller overview, build, single target, and AoE rotation, Shadow Bolt versus Drain Soul, how I like this in for Mythic Plus, and then finally a quick recap on my UI and add-ons that I like to use for Mythic Plus. Jump right into it with stats. Our stats did change a little bit, especially since my last guide, or my quick start guide for the War Within. So in that video, I talked about playing Haste Mastery for everything, and that is exactly what I played with on the beta. However, very early into season 1, a lot of our stuff started changing into Crit Mastery. So Crit Mastery is absolutely the best for us right now. However, there are some asterisks that I like to add to this. Definitely sim your character for everything. But the easiest rule of thumb is to try and keep your crit and your mastery close to each other if you can. My crit and mastery are pretty out of sync with each other right now. That's just kind of the way my gear is. When we get into the actual gear that we're looking for, I think it'll kind of make a little bit more sense where our extra crit is coming from. It's two specific items, honestly, that are going to have a lot of crit on it. However, keeping your crit mastery, the actual value, the rating of them, as close as possible, is usually pretty good for my sims. And I also want to say briefly, that doesn't mean, just because it's crit mastery doesn't mean you don't want any haste. The number of haste that you want is kind of up to you. However, I personally like anywhere between 15 and 20%. 20% probably being on the nice, it feels a little bit smoother to play. However, don't give up a ton of crit mastery for that. I personally would never go below 10% haste for myself. If you are comfortable playing below that, that's entirely up to you. I don't know if sims would ever put you too far below 10% haste, but just be very aware of that, when you are simming, and we'll go over how I like to sim for Mythic Plus if you're interested in that, in a later chapter if you want to skip there. But when you are doing your sims, try and be a little mindful of how much crit you're giving up for how much haste, or how much haste you're giving up for how much crit or mastery, right? So when you're looking at those breakdowns, definitely be aware of that. However, crit mastery for everything, and then you want a little bit of haste. I do also want to briefly mention True Stat Values, which is an add-on that kind of just helps tell you if you're getting into a DR range. If you're not familiar at all, in the end of Shadowlands, they added a new function where essentially once you get to certain breakpoints of haste, mastery, or crit, or even verse, that you'll start getting diminishing returns of that stat. However, I don't think we're really going to be too deep into that in season 1. That might be more of a season 3 or 4 problem, where you need to be aware of that. However, it is something you should be aware of. So grabbing the add-on True Stat Values kind of just helps out. You can see I'm in a 0% penalty. I'm not losing any of this stat, or I'm not even close to it on mastery yet, right? So it is something to be aware of. There are diminishing returns, and it may happen when we start getting deep into crit and mastery, maybe even later in the season, but I really don't think we're gonna have to worry too much. Even if you start dipping into a 10% penalty, it's still worth it in my opinion. Even in season 4 of Dragonflight, we were getting into close to the 20% DR range, which was what kind of where we were stop speccing into haste for that or whatever. So definitely something to be aware of, but not something you really need to be worried about. So I just want to put a little quick tip on that. Definitely grab True Stat Values if you're interested in that. Jumping into the gear, there are a few items this season, especially from the raid, that are definitely impactful and things you're going to be wanting. Not necessarily, obviously if you can do it on a mythic, that's great. I'm not part of a mythic guild or doing really a ton of mythic raiding, so I'll be more than happy with a couple of these items just on heroic. However, there's a few that we want to be aware of. The poison ring from the last boss is huge for us. This is one of the items where I was talking about earlier, where a ton of our crit's going to be coming from. So that ring has about 5,000 crit on it for a mythic, and I still think it's pretty close for that. Yeah, almost 5,000 again for the heroic one. But it's also the secondary effect of it, right? It does a bunch of extra poison damage and has a chance to proc more often. That ring is very good for us. The other one that's also from the same boss, Mad Queen's Mandate, another really solid trinket for us. It kind of helps with our single target a lot. Has a ton more crit on it as well. So those are the two items where a big portion of our crit's going to come from. Also, this thing has this huge hit on it. I think it's scaling with some of our affliction things. I could be wrong. I just know that this trinket, when popped after all of our cooldowns, can hit extremely hard, especially in keys. And it's also really great for things like first boss in Mists of Tyrannosaurus, right? Where you have that big burn phase. The boss is taking like 200% increased damage. This trinket will hit extremely hard in that window. So I personally really want this trinket. I haven't gotten one yet, even a normal one or LFR one. But if you do have one of these, I think this trinket plus Spy Masters, the other trinket I'm going to talk about, which comes from the Silken Court, is our current best trinket combo. If you don't want to run that trinket combo, or you just want to run one and then maybe a passive, Spy Masters is default for us. This trinket's insane. Has mastery on it, stacks up intellect per report, basically as you're in combat and you're doing spells and abilities, and then you can spend those stacks up to 40. You can only have up to 40 stacks, and then it gives you this huge int amp, right? So I think with mine at like 40 stacks, it's close to like 32,000 intellect if you get 40 stacks, right? The way I personally like to use this is basically with my 1 minutes, depending on how many stacks I have. If I have about 10-ish stacks, I'll ship my 1 minutes, unless I'm saving it for a big 2-minute window where like first boss miss, like I said. If I go in a miss, I know I'm not going to use my Spy Masters until that first boss burn. So I'm going to try and build as many stacks as I can, and then I'm going to use it. And then I'm just going to use it with my 1 minutes. So that's just the way I like to use it. If you feel comfortable saving it for your 2 minutes or something like that, or you can plan around that, great. But I think it's safe to just use it with your ones. Outside of that, there are a bunch of other little bonus items from the raid that are pretty solid for us. This cloak from Rashanan, mandatory in my opinion for Mythic Plus, has crit haste on it, which again has crit on it, and we can pick up a little more haste. Taking damage greater than 25% of your health grants you 24 HUD avoidance for the heroic one, and increases your healing taken by 10%. This thing, I don't have one, but just this alone, adding some tankiness to us every time you take a big hit in Mythic Plus, and then giving you more healing and avoidance, really, really strong. Definitely important. Definitely want to pick one of those up if you get your hands on it. The necklace from Sikran, also a similar situation. It's got a bunch of haste on it, which again, kind of like those, like the ring and stuff I talked about. This is kind of one of our big swing items for where I think we pick up a good chunk of haste. And has this extra little bonus effect on it, where every time you get healed, you have a chance to just give some mana back, but it's the verse proc on it too, right? I think this verse proc on it for me has like a really high uptime. I think it was like, yeah, it's like almost 37%, 36% uptime on that verse. That's pretty high for just an extra 700 verse, right? Especially, I'm super low on verse, so why not? That's pretty much it for the rare items that we want to look out for. Obviously, there's some other trinkets. Spellforge is okay. But there are other goodies that we can get from dungeons. So Sackbrood is another trinket that if you have Spy Masters or you have Mad Queens and you want another trinket that you can farm, Sackbrood's a great trinket to farm. Personally, that's what I'm running, Spy Masters plus Sackbrood. The other good one that I like to run a lot is Changeling. Changing a little complicated sim sometimes. You kind of have to set up the different spell IDs. Hopefully they re-add the thing they had in Shadowlands where you kind of just change it. However, when I have sim these, crit and mastery sim pretty close to each other, and same with the haste. So if you do want to set that up, go for it. If you're not sure, just pick whatever one of your stats is the lowest and just play with that. If you don't have a whole lot of crit, set it to crit. If you don't have a whole lot of mastery, set it to mastery. You know, I think haste is kind of the odd one. You can just leave it default if you want to. That's pretty much it as far as trinkets are concerned. A lot of people are also liking Gale. I think Gale and Sackbrood, in my opinion, are pretty close to each other. But if you get a Gale and you don't want to farm Sackbrood or vice versa, totally fine. Or if you get like a Myth Track Gale, totally fine, right? Very solid trinket. At least just in my, I've never gotten one. I've never played with one. But according to my sims, it's pretty close to my Sackbrood. So again, be on the lookout for one of those. If you get one, great. Grimbatol in general has a bunch of decent items for us. There's a lot of like heavy rings in there. So Crit Mastery Ring, Umber Span, very solid for us. Circle of Bone. If you don't have a whole lot of haste, it's an okay one. There's another like this Crit Mastery Ring is from Siege of Borealis. Again, not bad. Same with this Crit Haste Ring, not bad. Anything Crit Mastery or a little bit of haste to maybe help get your haste above like 10%, right? Just be on the lookout for that. I think that about covers all the special items like from raid that you should be looking out for. There's various other little trinkets. This one from Dawnbreaker is okay if you don't have Sackbrood or something like that, totally fine. Obviously Sackbrood or Changeling I think is going to be a little higher in your value list, but the two best you want to be looking out for, Spy Masters, Mad Queen's Mandate, at least in my opinion. And that goes for both Hellcaller and Soul Harvester. Soul Harvester and Hellcaller both pretty much use the exact same stats and the exact same trinket loadout. I personally like to play a little bit more haste for Hellcaller, but I think that's more of just a personal thing. But essentially, if you're enjoying Soul Harvester right now and you want to try Hellcaller, you don't really need to change anything. It's all the same gear. Embellishments aren't too complicated, but there are essentially two options for embellishments. So the main embellishment combo that I think most people are going to be running right now is Sigil of Ascension on your main hand or your offhand, and then Writhing Armor Banding on either your belt, boots, or bracers. The main reason for that, like I mentioned, you don't really want to put it on your cloak because there's that special cloak from the raid. And then obviously you don't really want to put it on a tier piece because, in my opinion, I mean, you can if you want to, especially now if you know like you have a piece you can put onto. But crafted gear can only go up to 636, so ideally you would replace these with a main piece that is myth track or higher, or sorry, heroic track or higher, so mythic track, which can go all the way up to 639. So Sigil of Ascension on your main hand or your offhand, and then Writhing Armor Banding on an off piece. Whatever the off piece is completely up to you. However, I do want to say, if you have already gotten like a myth track weapon that's a two-hander, or you've already crafted a two-hander, you know, you can put Sigil of Ascension on there. But again, if you've gotten a myth track main hand, there is another embellishment combo that is potentially better for Mythic Plus and will probably be changing over to as we start pushing just only into keys and we don't really care as much about raid. I think that this combo is a little bit more prio single target damage focused. There is one other combo that I have done some sims for that is also pretty good for us, which is essentially double Dawn Thread. So it just increases our crit baseline. Just as long as you're above 80% health, and increase your crit. I forget the exact number. I think it's a decent amount of crit. But essentially, we would just run 2 of these. So you would just put it on your belt or your bracers or boot and belt or whatever. Just a combination of those 2. So again, if you have not crafted anything yet or haven't crafted a weapon or whatever, I would probably craft a 2-handed weapon. So you save your sigils. I mentioned so you save your crest. I mentioned in my other video that I was going to craft main hand and then craft offhand or whatever. I ended up pulling a myth track 1-hander out of my vault like week 2, so then I was able to just craft an offhand. I got pretty lucky on that. If that hasn't happened to you, just craft a 2-hander with Sigil of Ascension on it and use less of your gilded crest, and then craft an off piece with Writhing Armor Banding. If you don't want to do that and you just want to craft the other 2, go with double Dawn Thread, in my opinion. I know focusing lens has been pretty decent for some people too. Personally, I didn't care for that. So the 2 I'm suggesting, Dawn Thread or Sigil of Ascension plus Writhing Armor Banding. So for a quick recap on gear, I level over everything. Crit Mastery. As for items, be on the lookout for Spymaster's Web, Mad Queen's Mandate, Sack Brood, the Poison Pact Ring, Zealot's Insignia, which is the necklace from Sikran, the Wings of the Shattered Tsar, which is the Avoidance Cloak from Rashanon. And then for your embellishments, you're going to want to craft either a 2-hander with Sigil of Ascension on it to save on crest, or a main hand or an offhand with Sigil of Ascension. And then put the Writhing Armor Banding on either belt, boots, or bracers, or craft either 2 off pieces with Dawn Thread. And then lastly, for your weapon enchant, go with either Depths or Radiant Power. I did want to briefly go over racial abilities, because I get asked this on stream all the time, like what's the best race for Mythic Plus? I think it's a little complicated. Blood Mallet obviously keeps track of like which one does the most damage or whatever. Single target or 5 target or whatever. And I definitely think that's important. Obviously damage ratios are definitely important, but you can kind of see like a lot of them are pretty close to each other, at least according to their sims, right? Definitely you can sim it yourself and change it. However, as far as Mythic Plus is concerned, I think there's really only one option that's very, very strong amongst the others, and it's already pretty high on the list, and it's Dwarf. Dwarf, not only damage is pretty good, but Dwarf racial ability for Mythic Plus is kind of huge. Being able to remove things off yourself, whether they're bleeds, magic effects, curses, or anything like that, is pretty massive, and it has very, very strong utility in Mythic Plus. However, if you don't want to play Dwarf, Night Elf Meld is still very good for a lot of situations. You just got to really figure out which ones you can meld. There's a lot of things you can meld, but you really need to be aware of that. Dwarf is kind of more reactionary than proactive, so sometimes people aren't ready for that. Human racial is actually pretty good too. Human for Affliction has always been pretty solid, just because you get 2% extra passive or stats from everything, which is not bad. And then the stun removal is very good as well, so there's a couple places where you can use human racial. However, I know a lot of people are going orc for like raid and things like that. Again, orc damage is fine, but if you are purely just interested in Mythic Plus, I think dwarf racial is pretty much uncontested as far as how good it is right now. You can play Dark Iron or regular dwarf, that's completely up to you. I think regular dwarf is better than Dark Iron dwarf, at least in my situations. I like the crit damage buff that they get, and I also like the 10% DR that you get just for popping dwarf racial on its own, even if you don't remove anything. I use that as a defensive as much as I can if I never have to dwarf anything, so definitely something to be aware of. I haven't put that in previous videos, but I've been asked that question a lot, so I want to throw it in here. I do want to briefly just go over how Solar functions. If you haven't watched my quick start video, or if you want more information on like every single talent or something like that, I'm going to go over the main core here, but you know, I kind of talk about everything there as well. I won't necessarily talk about the class talents in detail. This is pretty much the build that I run for everything. Essentially, I prefer Hellcaller over Mortal Coil. I kind of always have. However, if you're more of a Mortal Coil enjoyer, that's totally fine. Mortal Coil and higher keys is definitely helpful for the extra heal. My thing though is I usually pug a lot, and having an extra AoE stop is usually something really impactful, especially this season with the CC changes. I think having an extra CC stop that's somewhat of an AoE, it's basically 5 targets, right, is never bad. So I usually default with Hellcaller, but you can, if you're on Mortal Kombat, it's totally fine. The other talent that is kind of 50-50, so this reduces the casting of your Soulstone and create Hellstone by 50%. If you're in pugs, or if you're the only person that's B-resing in your group, I like to play with this. However, it does mean that usually I'm dropping this talent, which is increasing our max health by 5%, which is not nothing. So essentially, that's kind of the build that I play at all times. We did get a bunch of newer talents this expansion, so Pact and Gluttony allows us to use our Hellstones every 1 minute. This is a huge defensive, especially when tied with Soul Burn. So if you're Soul Burning your Hellstone, that is a massive heal with an additional 20% max health on top of that for 12 seconds. That's huge. That definitely helps us every 1 minute, because sometimes we just don't have a defensive for everything, right? Warlocks are known for being pretty tanky. However, a lot of the times the way damage works in Mythic Plus, we're not the best at taking rotting damage. This doesn't really help with that, but it helps us kind of make up for certain things. And there's definitely applications of this, especially every 1 minute. So use your Hellstones, Soul Burn your Hellstones as much as you can, especially playing Soul Harvester. You have plenty of lock, or you have plenty of Soul Shards for that. However, jumping into the main talents for Soul Harvester and the way that it works. So the main component of it is Succulent Soul Shards, which you have a chance to just be randomly generated whenever you're generating shards for them to be a Succulent Soul Shard, which increases your Malefic Rapture by 20% and unleashes the demonic soul within you, dealing extra shadow damage. So that's kind of the main core. And then the bottom core of that is that whenever you Soul Rot, it gives you, 3 Succulent Soul Shards on top of 3 actual Soul Shards. So you always, I'll talk about in the rotation, but you want to make sure you dump down at least 3 shards so that you don't overcap. And then you want to, go into your normal thing. So the other part of that is Shadow Ball and Drain Soul damage increased by 20%. This is really kind of where the main prio damage from Soul Harvester comes from. Not only is it just juicing up your Raptures, but it's also increasing our main prio damage. So Shadow Bolt or Drain Soul is increased by 20%, and then Nightfall increases the damage of Shadow Ball or Drain Soul by an additional 50%. I was talking about it briefly about how important Nightfall procs are, especially when I was talking about Shadow Ball versus Drain, right? Soul Anathema. Unleashing the demonic soul bestows a fiendish entity into the soul, targets dealing, some shadow damage, and then if this effect is reapplied, any remaining damage will be added to soul anathema. Or anathema. So you can kind of think of it like Devouring Plague. It kind of works similar to that if you play Shadow Priest, but essentially we want to try and maintain this as much as possible, and we do that through using Nightfall. So this talent, Soul Anathema damage is increased by 20%, and its damage is dealt 20% faster, and then consuming Nightfall activates Shared Fate or Feast of Souls. If we're spec'd into Shared Fate, then, it procs additional damage, or if you're procced into Feast of Souls, whenever you kill a target, you have a chance to generate Succulent Soul Shard. Personally, I really like the idea of this talent. However, the way that it works right now, as far as I'm aware, is you have to not only kill a target, you have to be the killing blow, and then it's a chance to generate a Succulent Soul Shard. So one of these is extremely consistent. Shared Fate procs every single time you use a Nightfall proc, right? Every single time you use a Nightfall, you're using a Shared Fate. If we look at one of my overalls, this is from a Dawnbreaker 12, Shared Fate is a decent amount of damage. It did almost as much as Drain Soul in this key, right? So that's not nothing. Whereas this might have contributed. We might have generated some extra Succulent Soul Shards, but I think the consistent, really, really strong with Shared Fate, right? And then, so procking that, and then using Nightfalls procs Soul Anathema, which kind of just keeps generating and continuing that on our target, right? Your Demonic Soul deals 100% increased damage to targets afflicted by your Unstable Affliction, so even more prio damage. This is all utility. These are utility talents, so Fall Down, cooldown reduced by 90 seconds. This is the one I default to most of the time. And then this one just makes people that you resurrect with Soulstone resurrect with 100% health and 100% mana. There is a choice to be made here. However, in my opinion, you should always default to this. Dark Pact shields now increased by 50% of your sacrifice health, or an additional 50%. That makes our Dark Pact extremely, extremely large when playing Soul Harvester. And then the other one is whenever you use a Hellstone, it basically always counts as soul burning it. So essentially, if you are not comfortable using your soul burn or something like that, you can use this. However, I think you should get more comfortable using your soul burn and just get the Dark Pact, because technically you could have both of these instead of only having one of these, right? Damage dealt by your demonic soul is increased by 10%. Consuming Nightfall feeds the demonic entity, doing more damage. we were talking about this. And then Corruption deals damage 20% faster, and Haunt grants Nightfall. This is a huge part of this, right? So we are able to guarantee a Nightfall proc every single time we haunt. So you can prepare yourself for that, knowing that every single time I haunt, I'm going to get a Nightfall immediately after that to save my Soul Anathema or to proc another Shared Fate, right? So it's all part of that. And then, like I already mentioned, Soul Rot is kind of the go button for Soul Harvester. Every 1 minute, whenever you Soul Rot, you generate 3 Soul Shards, and all 3 of those are sucking out Soul Shards, right? So our Raptures are huge in that window. That's also the perfect time when we'll have all of our dots out there, right? You'll have Viletane out there, you'll have Soul Rot out there, you'll have everything rolling on all of your targets. Those Raptures are going to be massive. Every 1 minute Soul Harvester has a lot of damage. Outside of that window, it's a little bit lackluster, and sometimes we're kind of trying to, you know, make up for it, but Nightfalls kind of help in between those. That's kind of where the Nightfall part of that all kicks together. Is we're still proccing things, we're still proccing Shared Fate, we're still proccing Soul Anathema, we're still doing all of that, and we're still randomly generating sometimes some second Soul Shards, right? So there are things you are doing, but our main windows are every 1 minute. There are about 3 builds that I've been running for most keys right now, and there's pretty much one build that I've become a little bit more aware of lately that I was not playing on the beta, and I actually haven't been playing that much as far as keys are concerned. But as I was getting things ready for this, I was doing some sims and getting things adjusted, and this is one of the builds that I saw, and I started doing some sims on that, and it's pretty good. It's pretty similar to what I've been playing before, other than moving a couple points around. So the 3 builds that I've been maining most of the time are this build right here. So I will talk about Shadow vs. Drain Soul later, but the big takeaways are Ravenous Afflictions versus Death's Embrace, and then Malediction versus Contagion and Improved Haunt, in my opinion. That's kind of where our choices are happening. Technically, you could probably remove Malevolent Visionary if you're doing lower keys as well, but I would just keep it for now unless you really want to drop that point. That's mainly around our 2 minutes, so you can think of it like that. But this does help our single target by, like, I think it's close to like 2% single target or something like that. So if you're really struggling with that. So this is the main build I've been defaulting to for most low keys. Ravenous Afflictions just in general. And by low, I mean anything like under 12. So if I'm saying low keys, I'm referring to essentially 10 and under, including maybe some 11s. The other build that I've been more leaning towards lately, especially as keys start to get higher, is this build, so 12 and above. And then the other one, again, Ravenous Afflictions, but it's just running, this one's just running Drain Soul with Malediction. So with my sims that I did, which we can talk about a little bit after this, actually showed Malediction improving our single target and Contagion improving our AoE. That's kind of what I saw for my personal sims anyways. It might change for you, but that's just kind of what it showed for me. So as you can see in this one, I'm pretty much defaulting to Improved Haunt to help with our single target and our prio damage in general, which Soul Harvester really excels at. And then Contagion just kind of helps with that crit damage. We have so much crit in general. I think these 2 talents are kind of interesting. Like I said, we can jump and look at my sims real quick. As I was getting things ready for this video, I did a bunch of sims the way I like to sim for Mythic Plus, which when I jump into it is essentially 1 boss 5 minutes, and then 5 bosses 5 minutes, and then 10 bosses 1 minute. Kind of just simulates different pull situations as far as keys are concerned. However, you can see in this build, for my single target build, it kind of showed a 1.5% gain for Ravenous Afflictions and pure single target, and that kind of just continued. Obviously, you can see some different gear options in there. I just kind of threw those in. And then Malediction's popping up in here around 0.2. Ravenous Affliction, obviously a little bit more valuable than Malediction is. But then when we look at like our 5 targets, 5 minutes, which is mainly more like consistent damage, you can see this build kind of excels there too. So if we're getting proud damage and we're getting AoE damage from this, and it's pretty much not even close to the next highest Ravenous or Sacrolash, which is almost still a 1% loss. That's looking pretty good for Mythic Plus. We like that, right? More prio and some consistent AoE, and then again, my full AoE sim, kind of the same story. So that's great. Again, looking through all the things, Sacrolash 0.1%, that's essentially, in my opinion, not an upgrade at all. Same with the minus 0.1. Anything in like the 0.3 range, in my opinion, it's almost nothing. And then we start getting like Infirmities pretty low on there too. So Malediction, again, 0.3%, again, pretty close. But this build's looking pretty solid for all of our things, right? 1 million single target damage, pretty good. When we look at our Hellcaller sims in the Hellcaller section, Hellcaller's about 60k-ish below this in pure single target, but has a little bit higher AoE cap. So that's one of the things, if you were trying to figure out if you want to play Soul Harvester or Hellcaller, that's kind of where that's at. But I kind of want to just briefly look at my sims real quick for these builds that I did, and just the different builds that I'm talking about. So all of these are still applicable, and all of the builds that I just talked about are still good. However, I personally think as keys get higher, or depending on what key you're doing, that's kind of where you're making the decision, right? So quickly go over that again. This build, Malediction with Ravenous Afflictions, that's kind of my lower key build that I've been defaulting to, but you can also drop Malediction for Contagion if you want to instead. But if you do that, you're going to have to go into Improved Haunt and then put a point into Contagion, right? So if you want to do that, totally fine. This is just kind of the build that I've been running most of the time for lower keys. And then this is kind of the build that I think I'm going to start defaulting to as we start getting to higher keys, 12 plus. Also, as always, if you are curious about what build is best, or if you're watching this in the future or something like that later in the season, I will keep an up-to-date list of all of my favorite talents for Soul Harvester and Hellcaller in my Discord and on the Twitch. So if you're interested in any of that and you want to stay up to date, join the Discord or come by the Twitch. So jumping into the actual single target rotation, just briefly, I mentioned it before, if you're curious about what's going on with my icons, all of my icons are custom. They're available free in my Discord if you want them. I can talk more about it in the UI section, but essentially, if you want to install them, super easy. All the information is in the Discord if you want that, but the icons are custom if they look different for you compared to what you're seeing on your screen. So when we're going into a poll, I like to do this. This is not necessarily what I'm sure Sims are saying is the perfect rotation, but this is the way that I like to open, especially for Mythic Plus. So if we're going into a single target, let's just say as a boss, I'm always going to use Haunt first, then UA, and then I'm going to Agony and Corruption, and then I'm going to Drain to get my 4 stacks, and then I'm going to start dumping shards here to make sure I get under. I usually get to about 1, and then I'm going to Vile Taint, Soul Rot, Spy Master if I have my stacks, Dark Glare, catch that Haunt if I need to, catch that Nightfall if I need to, and then I'm going to start dumping my shards, right? Granted, you shouldn't have to catch your Corruption. You'd normally be playing Absolute Corruption. I'm playing it just for the target dummy. I'm using my Nightfall as frequent as I can. I'm dumping my Raptures. I'm catching Crescendos. As soon as they come in, don't let that Nightfall fall, like I mentioned before. Crescendo. I'm trying to spend as many shards as I can while I have all of my dots out. Don't overcap on your Nightfalls when you haunt. Catch that Nightfall again, catch your dots, Crescendo. And now my Vile Taint's back up. If I want to, I can send this for a little bit more extra single target damage if I have the shards. If I don't have the shards, I will hold that Vile Taint to make sure that it lines up with my Soul Rot. If I have some shards to spend and I'm trying to get a little more damage, or I'm trying to, reapply my Agonies, send that Vile Taint as long as you don't desync it too much from your Soul Rot. And then I'm just catching dots and draining in between, spinning Crescendo so I don't let them fall, and I'm spinning Nightfall so I don't let them fall. And then just catching dots. And then as soon as our stuff starts coming back up, I'm going to try and make sure we're ready for our burn window. So I got my Crescendo. I'm going to send this. My Crescendo is going to expire. I'm going to send this Nightfall so I don't overcap. Again, dumping some shards here so I don't overcap on shards. Then we're going to go into our second burn here, right? Soul Rot, Corruption, catch that. Dump these shards. Catch that Nightfall right before it falls. And then dump all these Crescendos, right? I'm just spinning as many shards as I can in this window and trying to catch my dots so I can maximize all of our damage. I'm going to catch this UA before it falls. I have 1 shard. Catch this. That's pretty much it. Jumping into the Soul Harvester AoE rotation, it's not dramatically different from single target. However, there is a little bit of differences, but essentially now, since we don't use Seed as a spender anymore, it's really only used to get Corruption on target. So as my tank is getting ready to go into the poll, I'm already setting my focus target, which is going to be my priority mob, the one that I'm going to maintain my Haunt, my UA, my Agony on, and my Shadow's Embrace on that main target. That's also where I'm going to be proccing my Crescendos, because Crescendos only proc off of the mobs that have Agony, Corruption, and Unstable Affliction on them, right? Haunt doesn't count towards that, but it has to be a mob that has Agony, Corruption, and UA on it to proc it. It used to proc off of any mob as long as those dots were out there, but now it has to proc off of that mob. So in an AO situation, our prio target's really important. So I set my focus there, so I have this quickly in case I need to target that very quickly as I'm moving around. But as our tank's going in, I'm casting Seed of Corruption into a Haunt, and then immediately into my Unstable Affliction, into Vile Taint, and then we've spent enough shards, so I'm Soul Rotting. I'm catching this to get my Shadow's Embrace on the target, and then I'm Trinketing, Dark Glaring, dumping Raptures. And then I'm just trying to catch these Nightfalls before they fall off, and I'm just dumping as many shards as I possibly can. Catch this Nightfall before it falls. Crescendos if I got them, keep spinning those. And then we'll catch Agonies as soon as they start getting under 10 seconds. So I'm going to catch that Haunt before that falls, spin that Nightfall proc. Crescendo. We have Corruptions out there, so I'll cast that Seed. We're going to be able to catch these Agonies with this Vile Taint if we cast it very quickly here. So, right? Cast it right on the last second, caught him. That was because we Dark Glared. That's only because we Dark Glared. On the next set, we're going to have to recast all those Agonies to catch those, right? So then I'm just recasting this Seed because I'm not playing Unstable or Absolute Corruption. Get my Haunt back out there, get my UA back out there. Now we're under 10 seconds, so I'm catching these Agonies to get my Volatile Agony charge. I only usually catch about 5 of them per pull, even if you have a bunch more pulls. And then I'm just getting ready for our next set. So spinning Nightfalls, spinning Shards, and then these cooldowns are getting ready to come back up. So I want to dump enough Shards here, Vile Taints here, catch that UA, immediately go into Soul Rot. We might have overcapped there, but we're good. Then we just start dumping Raptures again, right? We're just doing that over and over again. Catch these Nightfalls before they expire, dump these Raptures while we have all of our maximum dots out there. That's pretty much it. Briefly going over Hellcaller, I do want to just mention also that I'm not going to go over the class talents a whole lot. However, this is pretty much the build that I run for majority of things. However, there's essentially one talent that I move around a lot, and it's this talent. Most of the time, if you're in Pugs or you're the only person in your group that's B-resing people, having a reduced cast on your Soulstone is a pretty big deal. It's like 2.5 seconds without it, and it's like 1.3 seconds with this talent. That's pretty large. Also, in conjunction with our new talent that allows us to use our Hellstones every 1 minute, being able to create a Hellstone in combat very quickly is sometimes your only way of survival. There's plenty of situations where I need to create my own personal Hellstone very quickly. This speeds up that cast time a lot. However, we are giving up this talent for it, or that's the talent that I give up for it, which increases our max health by 5%, which is not nothing. So if you don't need this talent, definitely pick up Demonic Fortitude. But for the most part, this is what I would default to 90% of the time, and consider if you really want to pick up this other talent for the increased Soulstone. But getting into Hellcaller itself, Hellcaller's main function is Wither. So Wither replaces Corruption, and it's essentially like a super juiced up version of that. So bestow a Vile Malediction, burning the Sinew and Muscle, which is crazy sounding, but deals a bunch of Shadow Flame damage immediately, and then additional 900,000 Shadow Flame damage over 13 or 15 seconds. And then all of our core stuff is kind of built around stacking this up. So fire damage dealt by your spells and abilities increased by 2%. Fire spells doing more crit. Then Blackened Soul is a main component of this. So spinning Soul Shards on damaging spells will further corrupt enemies affected by your Wither, increasing a stack count by 1. So now we're increasing our stacks of Wither, which is another important part. Each time Wither gains a stack, it has a chance to collapse, consuming a stack every 1 second and dealing with Shadow Flame damage to its host until 1 stack remains. So essentially, you can think about this is whenever we get our Withers stacked up, they have a chance to just collapse. And that collapse usually happens around 8 stacks. So after Wither reaches 8 stacks, or when its host reaches 20% health, Wither deals Shadow Flame damage every 1 second, and then Blackened Soul deals damage as a chance to gain Crescendo. So this is kind of a main component of this. So we're trying to stack up our Withers by spinning Raptures, and then if we can, we want to try and maintain that over 8 stacks so that it doesn't collapse too quickly. And while we're doing that, we're usually generating crescendos, which is kind of helping us, spin more Raptures, because our Soul Shard generation is definitely a little bit lower. Like I was talking about in the builds, while we might pick up our Relinquish a little bit more often, right? So shadow damage dealt by your spells and abilities increased by 2%. Shadow damage more crit. So these are just kind of like, you can think of these two as just like some passive damage. And this is like utility row on this side. So they get a different curse. Hellcaller gets a curse that's essentially Curse of Tongues and Curse of Weakness combined. This curse is really great. Use it if you're playing Hellcaller. There are a ton of caster mobs this season, so put that on any caster. Just know that when you're playing Affliction, if you're running Vile Taint will apply Curse of Exhaustion on a mob, which overwrites your curses on any mob that can be slowed. So most bosses cannot be slowed, so applying Curse of the Satyr or Curse of Tongues to that mob and then applying Vile Taint, as long as it can't be slowed, totally fine. But if it can be slowed, you want to Vile Taint first, then Curse of the Satyr. So definitely something to be aware of. Hate Fury Rituals and Blackheart Tactics, like I mentioned a little bit. Hate Fury Rituals, it causes your Wither deal 30% increased periodic damage, but its duration is 15% shorter. Most of the time, we're running this with Absolute Corruption. I run Absolute Corruption pretty much baseline now. You can run Siphon Life if you want to. I'm only running it right now because of the target dummy stuff. It's not a big deal. But this combination, Rituals, which makes it deal its damage faster, essentially has no downside because we run Absolute Corruption, right? And then Blackheart Tactics, Wither damage is increased by 20%. And then whenever Wither gains a stack from Blackened Soul, it has a chance to gain an additional stack. So like this one said, whenever it's ticking down, it has a chance to just gain a stack and just kind of catch itself back up. So this is definitely an interesting talent, and I think has a little bit more value maybe in hierarchies, but I think a good default is just Rituals. And then Dark Pack heals you for 100,000 every 1 second while it's active. This is actually pretty massive. And then the other one is just sacrifice 10% health for max leech. I don't personally like this talent. I don't think it really is that great, especially compared to this. Being able to heal back the health that you're using to sacrifice for your Dark Pack or even in situations where you're pretty low health and you have Dark Pact available, would normally be pretty scary because you're already sacrificing. This will just kind of heal you back up a little bit, right? As long as your Dark Pact is still not getting broken instantly. And then Marcus Avius, agony damage is increased by 20%, and then Blackened Soul deals 2% increased damage per stack of Wither. Again, we already read Season of Demise. Season of Demise is kind of like a core function of Hellcaller, in my opinion. I mentioned it earlier, but the synergy that happens when you're in a large pull with Hellcaller and you have a lot of stacks of Wither that are kind of all stacked up and they start, getting into their Blackened Soul area and they're all like ramping down and you're proccing a ton of crescendos and you're kind of trying to maintain all these stacks out there. That's the thing that I really like the most about Hellcaller. And you're just proccing a lot of crescendos. It procced a lot more on the beta. And so I hope they maybe make an adjustment to that, but it's still a lot of fun even on live right now. Critical strike damage increased by, or dealt by Wither increased by 10%. And then Wither has a chance to gain a stack when it critically strikes. Stacks gained this way do not activate Blackened Soul. So another value for crit, right? We talked about earlier about why crit mastery is so good. I think the way that Soul Harvester and Hellcaller both kind of function just has led to the strength of crit mastery, but with, a side emphasis of haste. And then Hellcaller gets an additional butt, Malevolence. So that's what you saw in the middle of my bars here. A different icon. If you're like, again, my icons are custom. It doesn't look like that, but it's the same ability. Dark magic erupts from you. It's a 1-minute cooldown. Increases, corrupts yourself for 20 seconds, causing your enemies to suffer from your Wither to take a bunch of damage, and then increasing the stat count by 6. And then while corrupted, your haste increased 8%, and then spending a soul shard on damaging spells grants 1 additional stack of Wither. So this is, like I mentioned in the Soul Harvester area, where Soul Rod's kind of your go button, Malevolence is your go button for Hellcaller. You want to make sure you have all of your Withers out there. We'll go over it in the rotation section when we jump into that. But when you push this, you're going to get a bunch of haste. All of your Withers are going to essentially like ignite and gain a bunch of stacks, and they're going to take a bunch of damage. So, and then while you're in that window, that 20-second window, every shard that we spend is not only doing our normal Rapture damage, right? Because we're just hitting all those things with Malefic Rapture, but we're also increasing all of our Wither stack counts by 1. So that's kind of that loop that I was talking about, where we're trying to get all of our stacks as high as we can and then maintain them as high as we can, so that when they start collapsing, we start generating more crescendos, and hopefully we're still kind of in that window where we're trying to gain those, right? So when we jump into the rotation, kind of just have that in mind. Jumping into Hellcaller, Hellcaller is a little bit more complicated than Soul Harvester in the sense of what builds we're playing. I'm pretty much defaulting to one build in most keys. However, I am considering changing it up when I start messing around with Hellcaller and more 12s, which I will be doing during this season. I've only done like a handful of 12s this season. I've only timed 1 at the making of this video, which, 12s have definitely been a bit of a challenge right now, but they've been a ton of fun. So anyways, jumping into it, Hellcaller, in my opinion, is definitely the weaker of the two. However, it's my personal favorite. I enjoy playing Hellcaller a lot. It's just a little bit different of a playstyle, and right now its main weakness is single target and prio damage is kind of Hellcaller's where it kind of struggles. And obviously shard generation is a little strange. It kind of is in between where Affliction was previously in like Dragonflight, if you're familiar with that, and our current version of Affliction, where you have Soul Harvester and you have plenty of shards. So Hellcaller kind of fits into a weird spot there. However, there are some really cool things with Hellcaller that kind of help with that, and in a sense, it's like Season of Demise. Whenever Blackened Soul stacks up, and then when it starts ticking down, you have a chance to proc crescendo on top of your already crescendo. So in my opinion, when you get into a really good environment where you have a large pull where you can stack up all your Withers, and then you're kind of playing that game where you're trying to maintain your Withers above 8 stacks and don't let them fall too quickly, and you're trying to just kind of keep those rolling. When you're generating a lot of crescendos in that window, that's my favorite part about Hellcaller. So those are a little bit difficult sometimes. I will talk more about that in like the rotation section of kind of what you're doing, but that's the thing that I really like about Hellcaller. However, as far as the builds are concerned, it's a little complicated. So the main build that I've been playing is essentially this build, which runs Death's Embrace. If you feel like you're doing lower keys, or again, when I'm saying lower, I'm referring to anything that's below 12. 11's kind of a gray area, so just think of it 10 and lower, and then 12 and up. 11, like I said, kind of weird. However, you can drop Death's Embrace, and in my opinion, I would go into Relinquished. I do have another build that is kind of a mix between the two, so you still have Death's Embrace, but you can still get either Improved Haunt with Contagion, and you can still take your Relinquish, right? So you can drop Death's Embrace entirely. But for me, the build that I've been running the most in whenever I'm playing it has just been this with Shadow Bolt, just because I think with Hellcaller, you generate so many Nightfalls sometimes that trying to weave in those drains and get value from those Nightfall procs feels extremely difficult. Whereas if you have like instant cast Shadow Bolts, you can just weave those in and hopefully proc more volleys and then proc more crescendos and then go back into trying to catch your withers, right? So for me, it just feels a lot more fluid with Hellcaller. It's why a lot of times I also default to playing it with Soul Harvester. I'm just really a lot more comfortable with playing with improved Shadow Bolt right now. However, there is nothing wrong with playing with Drain Soul at all, and you might actually, once you start getting higher keys, you might need to start defaulting more to Drain Soul for the increased prio damage because Hellcaller is already lacking that, and help snipe shards because again, Hellcaller is kind of lacking more shards, right? So definitely something to be aware of, but that's kind of just, I'll go more into it. I'll have the whole section about Drain versus Shadow Bolt, but essentially I'm talking about it in both sections just in case you don't see the other one. But that's kind of my opinion about that. Also, movement is a big part of it, right? But kind of quickly to go over the builds again, this is the one I've been defaulting to the most. You can drop Death Embrace for Relinquished, or you can go into Improved Haunt for a little bit more prio damage and go for Drain and keep Death Embrace, or again drop Death Embrace and go for Relinquish if you want more shards. Again, I think Death Embrace gets a lot more value as keys get higher, especially as soon as that 35% health becomes a much larger number, right? So 35% health in a 10 and 35% health in a 12 are two vastly different things, right? Especially on bosses. So definitely something to be aware of. And then this one is kind of just the same situation, except it just changes it to Drain. So the other big thing I want to talk about very briefly about builds here is Hate Fury Rituals versus Blackheart Tactics. In my opinion, Blackheart Tactics gets a little bit more value from my Sims in single target. We'll go over those in a second. And then Hate Fury Rituals definitely seems to get a lot more value as far as consistent pressure is concerned. So I think both of them are totally fine. I think as far as my Sims are concerned, Hate Fury Rituals Sims pretty high compared to Blackheart Tactics. But I think that Blackheart Tactics is a little random. So I don't know how the Sims handle that, but it's a chance, right? Every time that your Wither gains a stack from Blackened Soul, it just has a chance to get another stack. So I don't know exactly how Sims handle that, but it's something to be aware of. You can definitely play either one of these. I think I default more often to Rituals than I do Tactics, but the way I used to look at it was Rituals for lower keys and Tactics for higher keys. But I don't know if that's necessarily the case anymore. Looking at the Sims real quick, you can kind of see this is my single target Sim. Again, 5 minutes, 1 boss. No buffs other than Lust, and then obviously food or whatever, but no raid buffs. You can see Blackheart Tactics picked for this one, and then as far as everything's concerned, there's really no other talent that even starts to happen until around the 2% range, which that's what I was saying is the builds are kind of all over the place for Hellcaller. There's not really a couple talents that are really close to it. 2%'s a pretty large jump. This is 893 versus like 915, right? So that's a pretty significant jump as far as talents are concerned. However, Hellcaller's strength is not in single target, so it's definitely something to be aware of if you do want to play Hellcaller. Again, I really enjoy it, but it's something to be aware of, especially when you compare 915, its highest single target damage, versus the Million Soul Harvester of my current gear, right? And then looking at its 5 target 5, again, very good. Again, this is higher than our Soul Harvester one, but not by a whole lot. Hate Fury Rituals on this one though. And then it wants me to go like some crit mastery, but it's not a big deal. But you can see Malediction and then Relinquish are almost identical with each other, and then Malediction is back, but with I think these are all with Drain, right? Just like the boots. So these are all pretty much identical to each other as far as Malediction and Relinquish is concerned. I think most of the time I'd probably default to Relinquish if you're really struggling with shards, because it just adds some extra chances. But if not, then go with Malediction. Contagions on the list too, but you can kind of see it drops its value a little bit. I think mainly this also helps our single target. You can kind of see Malediction's already part of this. Two stacks of Malediction for this build and no improved haunt, which I still think this is crazy that this is simming like this. I would expect improved haunt to actually sim higher, but this also does embrace, so definitely something to be aware of on that. And then our 1 minute 10 targets are like crazy burst one. Hate Fury Ritual, I think it's always going to get a little more value in that. I think it's interesting. Relinquish is getting more value here over Contagion and Malediction, but I think it's a short sim, so any chance to generate extra shards is just a chance at an extra Rapture, which is even more stacks of Wither, especially in that sort of a thing. So you can kind of see 5% is quite a number, though, in my opinion. That's quite a jump for some of those talents. So definitely something to be aware of on that. Like I mentioned, all the builds are pretty close to each other in terms of single target, and not so much in AoE, which is kind of the issue with Hellcaller. It's not as bad, in my opinion, as our previous decision we had to make in Dragonflight, which, if you're familiar with that, where we had to choose between Doom Blossom and Dread Touch and stuff like that. They both still have very good single target, and they both still have very good AoE. It's more so a playstyle difference, and one definitely excels a little bit more than the other in single target, which I think is a little bit more impactful this season as of right now. So Hellcaller is definitely still an option, but it definitely should not be your first option. Let's just say that. So as far as builds are concerned, the one I would probably default to the most is this one. And then if not, then I would probably default to this one with probably Relinquish unless you start doing hierarchies. Also, as always, all of these builds will be linked down in the description below and will always be updated in my Discord. So if any builds change or if anything like that happens, or you want like to know what's the most up-to-date build if you're watching this, you know, later in the season, if anything has changed, join the Discord. All the builds will be in there. Jumping into the Hellcaller single target rotation. So briefly, I do want to mention, if you notice my icons are a little different from yours, I do have custom icons. They're all available in Discord for free if you want them. I made them. I just wasn't liking some of the default ones, so I changed them to be a little more Affliction-y. If you want to pick them up, they're all available in Discord for free. It's all good. But in case you're wondering why my things look different, that's why. So as we're getting ready to go into the pool, you can set a focus target if you want. That's more of an AoE situation. We'll talk about that when we get to there. But the difference for Soul Harvester and Hellcaller, in my opinion, as far as rotation, doesn't change a whole lot. But when we're getting ready to go into the pool, it's Haunt into UA, into Agony, Corruption, in this case Wither, and then I'm going to Shadow Bolt twice, or unless I'm running Drain, then I'm going to Drain until I get my 4 stacks. But I want my 2 stacks of Shadow's Embrace, and then I'm Viletaining, and then I'm Soul Rotting, Trinket, Malevolence, Dark Glare, Potion, Dump Raptures. And then I'm going to catch any dots in there. But my main focus is I'm trying to keep this above 8 stacks if I can, so that we maintain our Malevolence or our Wither before it starts ticking too far down into Blackened Soul, right? Blackened Soul starts around 8 seconds. That's our main focus. And then I'm just catching these. I'm catching all my dots, and then I'm going back to maintaining, right? Our burn is over, Malevolence is over. I'm catching all my dots, and then I'm just going into spamming Shadow Bolts, or draining in this case, catching our Haunt, Shadow Bolt, spinning Crescendos. You can spin this Viletain if you want, if you have some shards to dump into it. Sometimes I will hold it if I know that I'm not going to be able to sneak with my Soul Rot. That's the important part. But if you have some shards to spend in that window, it's an extra dot in single target to help you get a little bit more damage. So I'm just catching my stuff, and I'm just getting ready for Malevolence and Soul Rot to come back up. They're both 1-minute cooldowns. I'm just getting ready for those, and I'm trying to conserve shards here. Since Hellcaller doesn't really generate shards the same way that Soul Harvester does, where we have a guaranteed button, I have 3. I'm going to Soul Rot, Viletain, Malevolence, or Viletain, Soul Rot, Malevolence, either way in that order. And then we're doing the same thing again, trying to keep our stacks over, you know, 8 stacks, and then we're just maintaining all of that. Catching all of our dots, dumping as many Raptures as we can in this window. Catch our Nightfalls, that kind of stuff. That's pretty much it. Jumping into the Hellcaller AoE rotation. It's not dramatically different from single target, however, there are a few things. Now that Seed is no longer a spender for us, its main function is just to apply Wither. However, applying Wither is a massive deal for Hellcaller. It's your main thing. So if you are playing Absolute Corruption, which most of the time I am playing Absolute Corruption, then you only have to do it once per pull. If you are not playing Absolute Corruption, you're going to have to do it a few times per pull depending on the duration of the pull. The other thing that I want to say, setting a focus target or having a priority target, also really important for both Hellcaller and Soul Harvester. So as my tank is getting ready to go into the pull, I'm already finding which target is my priority target. If you're using my Twitter profile, I have them change, like it's a different color for each one that's my priority mob most of the time for most pulls. However, just picking whichever one that is your priority target is fine. But that target is going to be the one that I'm going to set my focus target with, and is the one that I'm going to maintain Agony, Wither, and Unstable Affliction on, because that's how we proc Crescendo. In the past, it used to work as long as you had all 3 of those dots out there. Any Shadow Bolts or Drain Souls that you hit on any target could proc Crescendo. The way it works now is that your Shadow Bolt or Drain Soul have to hit the target that has all 3 on them. So that's why setting your focus target or having a prio target is really important to proc Crescendos. So as my tank is getting ready to go into the pull, I'm picking my prio target, I'm setting my focus with that on my prio target with my keybind, and then I'm immediately Seed into a Viletain, into UA, into Haunt, into Soul Rot, and then Trinket, Malevolence, Dark Glare, ship this Nightfall proc to try and proc Crescendo and get our Shadow's Embrace, and then I'm dumping Rapture as fast as I can. Ship Nightfall, try and proc Crescendo, 2 Crescendos, Crescendo, and we're just trying to get as many Raptures as we can in this window and maintain these stacks, right? Our Nightfalls are definitely with Shadow Bolt are helping us try and proc more volleys, more Crescendos, right? And then I'm going into immediately getting ready to catch my Agonies with this first set. So this Viletain, I can catch these Agonies if I cast it fast enough. If I cast it right then, I can catch all those Agonies right after we Dark Glare. The next one, I'm going to have to manually catch these. So then I'm just trying to maintain our dots, catch our UA, catch our Haunt. And then as he's getting under 10 seconds, I'm going and catching at least 5 of my Agonies. So I'm catching these, spend our Nightfalls, and I'm preparing for our next Malevolence window that's coming. So any crescendos, I don't want to overcap on shards, catch that agony, send these Nightfall procs as they come, and then I'm preparing for this next window that's happening in 5 seconds. I'm gonna get this out there. This Vile Taint's coming up. I'm gonna catch that immediately into Soul Rot, and then catch that UA, Malevolence, Trinket, dump these Raptures, catch that Nightfall, Rapture, 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 spin that Nightfall, Rapture. Any crescendos we're weaving in, we're just trying to maintain as many of these stacks as we can, right? Rapture, and just spin. That's all we're doing in this window. We're just spending as much as we can. Don't let these fall. We don't have Dark Lair, so we got to catch these by hand. And then again, catch these. Nightfall proc. Catch that Haunt if we can. Nightfall proc. My Vile Taint's back up. I maybe could have almost caught that, but I'm pretty sure we wouldn't have been able to. So send that Vile Taint, keep it synced up with the Soul Rot, and that's pretty much the gist of it. That's the whole thing. We just keep doing that in cycles. Briefly talking about Shadow Bolt versus Drain Soul, because this is a question I get asked so many times on the stream, because I usually am playing with Shadow Bolt, and I think that's kind of uncommon right now. I mentioned it in both categories a little bit here, but essentially what it comes down to, at least for me, is Nightfall procs with Shadow Bolt. So when you have a Nightfall proc with Shadow Bolt, it causes your Shadow Bolt to be an instant cast ability. So if there's a lot of movement or things like that, having an extra thing that I can toss out there to help me proc a crescendo or a Shadow Bolt volley in a movement situation, or while I'm in the middle of a big ramp or big like AoE pull, in my opinion, I really like having that option, right? However, Drain Soul is technically more damage in single target, which if you think about it, just kind of makes sense, right? If you're able to just sit there and drain without having to move, of course you're going to be doing more damage. Plus it has that extra modifier of the execute portion, right? Especially when you combine it with something like Death's Embrace. That's totally an option. However, a lot of the times in these keys, finding those moments where you can plant your feet for that long amount of time and not be spinning Raptures, I think is a little rare. However, they do exist, especially as keys get higher, so that is something to be aware of. But especially with something like Hellcaller, or even especially with Soul Harvester, your Nightfalls are pretty important. Soul Harvester, especially your Nightfalls, are important. So you don't really ever want to overcap on those, especially when paired with Crescendo. So these things proccing this is huge. Not only is it something that saves you shards that you can spend on another Rapture or a Vile Taint or something like that, but it's something that you can cast another thing while moving, right? So again, I think there's a lot of synergy there that happens with Shadow Bolt that's not so much just about the damage, it's about what it's also doing. So it's enabling crescendos, it's enabling other Shadow Bolt volleys that are tied with Cunning Cruelty, right? It's potentially proccing your Soul Anathema for Soul Harvester, or not even potentially, it's literally proccing your Soul Anathema for Soul Harvester, right? If you're not familiar. Every time you consume a Nightfall, it procs Shared Fate or Feast of Souls, right? And Shared Fate does more damage and procs your Soul Anathema, which is even more damage, kind of like a second thing. So sometimes, in my opinion, if there's a lot of heavy movement, or it kind of just fits my playstyle a little bit, where I need something to cast while I'm having to move, Shadow Bolt in that world is nice. However, there's the opposite side of that, where you'll find yourself just sitting there spamming Shadow Bolts, right? And you could maybe be doing a little bit more damage to Drain. So there is a little bit of a trade-off to happen there, but I kind of wanted to just briefly go over that because it's something that gets asked so frequently in the stream, and it's something that I've tried to get better about answering. I definitely think it's personal preference. And I definitely think there are strengths and weaknesses to both of them. And I absolutely think that Drain Soul, it will probably be a better default choice. However, I don't think that necessarily means that Shadow Bolt is like a terrible option or something like that if you want to play with Shadow Bolt. And again, if you're doing keys that are like below 12s, you could probably play either one of these. However, if you're really struggling with your shards, definitely play with Drain more frequently and snipe those shards. If you don't want to do that, or you want to play Shadow Bolt and you're struggling with your shards, try moving your UA around and it can help you proc a little bit. Or every time a mob dies, right, generate a shard. So you can try doing that as well. Not the best option, but that's what I do if I want to play Shadow Bolt more frequently and I'm running out of if I'm running low on shards. So I hope that answers that question a little bit. I'm more than happy to talk about this more on stream and things like that, but hopefully that kind of answered that. I'm going to quickly go over the way I like to sim from start to finish. So first off, you're going to want to make sure you install the add-on Simulation Craft. And then you're going to do /simc in your little text window. Copy and paste that string. That's going to give all the information for your character. And then you're going to go over to raidbots.com, and you can either have an account or not. Go to Top Gear. I only like to sim for Top Gear. Don't sim for stat weights and things like that. Paste that string that you just got from SimC into that. And then You're going to want to go down and select the different options of whatever you want to sim. So if I want to know what the difference between this necklace is, if I want to adjust this necklace, if I want to add sockets or remove sockets or upgrade them, you can adjust what currency you have. You know, if you want to do some hypothetical things of what you should upgrade, things like that. You can add items that you don't have here. So like if I didn't have a changeling, I could add a changeling here. I could set the eye level wherever that is, right? You can set the item or the stats of that item if you want to do a craft item or whatever. And then we're going to select items that we want, add sockets, whatever we want to do. Again, if you want to do craft items, that's all good. Then you want to select any enchants or gems that you might have that you want to apply, or if you want to compare gems. So like if I want to know what difference between a haste or a mastery crit or whatever. Then you can also adjust your talents that you want as well. You can do a custom loadout, or you can do you know, the different builds that you have saved as your main thing, and you can compare those two to each other. So I can compare these two if I wanted. You can add a custom loadout. There's a bunch of cool things you can do in here as well. If you already have a loadout in here, so like if I copy this loadout and then I generate combinations, I can select talents by right-clicking them that I don't want to compare, and then I can have it sim talents to tell me what the difference between these two talents is in this environment. So if I were to remove a talent point from here, I can then compare all of these talents with each other, and by right-clicking I can exit out talents that I don't want it to use. So say for instance I don't want it to use this in its thing when it's generating combinations, and I can save this, right? And then the main thing is when we get down into simulation options, you want to select patchwork. And then I have 3 different ways I like to sim for Mythic Plus. So first one is pure single target. So that's one boss, 5 minutes. And I don't like to use any buffs other than Bloodlust. So I will turn off all of these other than Bloodlust. And now you can just set this to default if you want, or you can set your exact potion, just Tempered Potion, and then Chaos is our best flask right now. So Bloodlust, no other buffs, potions. You can do a rune if you want, but again, that doesn't matter. And then sim, that's for pure single target. And then I like to do a consistent sim, which is 5 bosses, 5 minutes. That's more of a consistent pull situation where you don't always have your cooldowns for every pull, and it kind of just gives you a more baseline. And then I like to do one large pull, which is like 10 bosses, 1 minute. So that gives us like our Dark Lair, big malevolence window and all that kind of stuff, but not too much. So just our huge, what a larger pull would look like, and what maybe sims better than there. Just know that when you're doing shorter sims like this 1 minute sim, haste will always be more valuable in these sims. So definitely use all 3 of them and compare them. So I like to look at my single target and compare it to the 10 bosses, and compare it to the 5 bosses or whatever, and get an idea of, do I want to try and trade off how much of something that's maybe better for AoE for single target, or is one build or one setup very good for single target and only a little bit worse for AoE? In that case, I definitely want to get the more single target out of that build, right? You can also use a dungeon slice if you want to. I know a lot of people are asking about that. I don't personally use dungeon slice all the time. It has definitely gotten better and gotten a lot closer to being a realistic number or a realistic example of that. However, I would just use it as part of your toolkit when simming. You can do the 1 target 5 minutes, the 5 targets 5 minutes, and the 10 bosses 1 minute, and throw a dungeon slice in there, and then compare all of those results and make those decisions for yourself, right? Like I also mentioned in the stats section, Affliction is a little weird in the sense that Crit Master is really, really good for us. However, haste is more of a playstyle thing and how it feels to you to play, and Affliction is very impacted by haste. There's a lot of casts that we have, and there's a lot of globals and things that we're trying to catch our dots and things. So haste is something that is a little bit more personal to you, and something you'll have to decide what number works best for you. So compare all those things, figure out how much haste you want to play with, or how much of a certain stat you want to give up for what, and use sims to help you get there. Starting off, I just want to say you don't have to use my UI. This is merely just a section of what I do use, and everything about, or all of my UI is available for free in my Discord. So if there's anything that you like here or anything you want, you can grab it in the Discord for free. For my main UI, I use LVUI. My main action bars, a lot of people get confused for weak auras. That's not a weak aura. Those are just LVUI action bars that I've customized. I do have a set of weak auras that goes above my cast bar that you can see, that is mainly just tracking uptime of buffs and trinkets and things like that. For my nameplates, I use Plater with a couple mods for specifically tailored for Affliction, including a pandemic timer that makes my dots glow green when they need to be refreshed. I use Omni CD to track my party's cooldowns as well as my party's kicks. I find that very helpful, especially your kick tracker. I use Bigwigs and Little Wigs to track the boss timers, as well as now they are offering a support of spell trackers on nameplates. That used to be a weak aura. That weak aura still exists, but I use just Bigwigs and Little Wigs now to track most important dots next to my nameplates. That's what you'll see there. as well as my boss timers that you'll see there. Those are currently edited by WinTools, so that's a plugin for LVI that I always recommend. If you use LVI, you should absolutely grab WinTools. There's a bunch of great things in there, including the dungeon filter that a lot of people ask me about on the Twitch. For my key timer, I use an add-on called Warp Deplete. It doesn't have any profiles available. However, I have all of the settings that I use for my Warp Deplete available in the Discord if you want to see what that's like to set that up. That essentially covers all of the main things that I use. I do also have some weak auras that are dungeon weak aura specific things. Those are available on Wago. I'll link to them in the description. I didn't make those. Those are made by somebody else over there and maintained by somebody else. I did edit them a little bit to match my UI, but the core weak auras themselves, that's all available on Wago. If there's anything that I missed here, feel free to come by the stream and ask. I will also be making a full-length video about how I set up my UI and how to get all that going if you're interested in that and this is a little too daunting. Either way, that will be coming very soon in a later video. I just wanted to quickly cover what is in my UI and what I use because I feel like Affliction is a spec that benefits heavily from it, at the very least, a nameplate add-on, because having clear and concise information to track all of your dots is really important for Affliction and something that will help you get better as a player. And I think something that is heavily overlooked when people are learning how to pick up a new class. Setting up your UI is very beneficial for most classes and extremely important for Affliction because tracking dots on a bunch of nameplates, especially with default nameplates, is extremely difficult and you're making it more difficult on yourself. So set yourself up for success. You don't have to use my UI or my nameplates or anything for me. Just set yourself up so that you can see all that information clearly and what's best for you. All right, guys, that about wraps it up. Hopefully this helped you out. If it didn't or you have more questions, feel free to come by the stream, twitch.tv/arson, ask any questions, join the Discord, all that kind of stuff, leave a comment. I try and get to as many of those as I can. As always, I really do appreciate you guys. I know this took me a little while to get out, and I know a lot of my YouTube videos are a little behind, but it's something that I try and put as much effort as I can into, and a lot of times it's just, I'm very picky and it takes me a little bit. I'm sorry. I do appreciate that. If you're part of the Patreon, I think you know that. If you're part of the stream, I think you know that. You've heard me talk about it plenty of times. I do want to briefly mention there are things coming to the YouTube. I'm currently working on a dungeon tips and tricks video. I hope to have that out eventually. I don't know exactly when, but those take me a while to put together with all the clips and things like that. And to get all that info just in general, right? I have another UI setup video that I'm going to be trying to do where I just talk about how to set up my UI entirely the way that I like to set it up, because I know I get a lot of questions about that. Kind of just walk through the whole process, shouldn't be too long. And then as always, I will be doing my dungeon videos that we've been doing since the beginning of the channel. If you're interested in those or more of that kind of stuff, all of that will be coming very soon. If you are interested in Affliction content in general, this is kind of the place for it. If you want live content, that's on the Twitch, but I'm going to try and maintain this as much as I can with as many Affliction videos as I can. I think Affliction's in a great spot this season, so I'm very excited. Also, I don't talk about it very often, but if you want to get some designs that I made on some shirts or some cool like hoodies and mugs and things like that, and you want to support the stream or the content, check out broomnight.com. I have a new Halloween collection of a bunch of designs that I made that I think are pretty cool. A lot of them are stuff from the stream, so if you know anything that's going on over there, you'll get the jokes and things like that. But if you just want some cool Affliction themed merchandise or other things like that and want a way to support, go ahead and check that out. If you do want to see live keys, like I said, come by the Twitch. But no matter what, I just want to say thank you guys so much. I truly appreciate you guys, and I will see you guys in the next one.